It said that two gunmen walked in the family bungalow and opened fire. They didn't say anything.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're tapping into the streets of LA, and we're going to be talking about the Rollin 60 Crips versus everybody. We're going to be going over different cases involving the 60s. Now, the Rollin 60 Crips are one of the largest African-American street gangs in the city of Los Angeles. They formed back in the 1970s and were a branch off the original West Side Crips founded by OG Tookie Williams. But since the 1970s, the Rollin 60s have built a very violent presence in the streets of LA, being connected to some of the most ruthless murders in the streets. Now, one of the most brutal violent killings took place on August 31st, 1984. At around 6 a.m., Rollin 60 members Taquan Cox, aka Lil Fee, Darren Williams, and Horace Burns arrived at a home on 59th Street. Williams had addresses written on a piece of paper for the house that they were targeting. The van was driven by a woman by the name of Lisa Brown. Now, as the men prepared to go inside this home, one of the Rollin 60 members said, "We killing everybody inside." Lil Fee and Williams got out of the van, while Horace Burns stayed inside. Lil Fee was armed with an M1 rifle, and Williams had a handgun. As they headed to the door, Lil Fee would kick the door in, and sitting at the kitchen table was 57-year-old Ebora Alexander, eating breakfast while drinking her coffee. Lil Fee would take the shotgun and put it to the back of her head and shoot her multiple times. Next, Lil Fee and Williams would head into the bedrooms, and they would shoot and kill 23-year-old Deidre Alexander as she laid in her bed. She was shot in the head and killed. Next door was Deidre's brother, Neil Alexander, who woke up hearing her screams. As he saw Lil Fee standing in her doorway, he jumped on Fee's back and started to fight him. As Fee tossed him to the ground, Fee then took the gun and hit Neil in the face, and Neil ran out of the back door, fleeing the home. They then went to the next bedroom, which had 8-year-old Damien Bonner and 10-year-old Damie Garner. Lil Fee would then proceed to shoot both of them in the head, killing them instantly. Another young boy by the name of Ivan Scott heard the gunshots and ran inside a closet. After the shooting, both Lil Fee and Williams left the house and jumped inside the van. And as they were driving off, Lil Fee said, "I just blew a bitch head off." Now, police would arrive shortly after multiple 911 calls came in, and the police would find the bodies of the families all over the home. The police would find young Ivan inside the closet still hiding. That night on the news, it had been revealed that this was the family of former NFL player Kermit Alexander, and this would make headlines around the United States. Authorities assumed that Kermit Alexander had something to do with this crime, but it would later turn out that that was incorrect. Later on, Rollin 60 members will get rid of the evidence, and Lil Fee will give an M1 rifle evidence to a man by the name of James Kennedy, who was supposed to destroy the gun, along with the t-shirt. But instead of destroying the gun, Kennedy would take the rifle and put it in some nearby bushes next to his home. And about a month later, Kennedy will be arrested on narcotics charges and would tell the police about the M1 rifle that he had hid in his bushes. Police would eventually link this gun to Rollin 60 member Lil Fee, and Lil Fee will be arrested. Eventually, after witnesses came forward, Darren Williams and Horace Burns would also be arrested by authorities for this murder. Police would eventually discover that the men were contracted for a $60K hit, but come to find out that they had gone to the wrong house, killing the wrong people. After weeks of testimony, it came to light that Darren Williams was the mastermind behind the entire hit. And by the end of the trial, Horace Burns will be sentenced to life in prison, Darren Williams will be sentenced to death, and Trigger Man Taquan Cox, aka Lil Fee, would also be sentenced to death. And after getting his sentence read, Lil Fee would kick over the table in anger. But sometime later, Darren Williams would get his death sentence overturned, and he would be eventually sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Now, 2 years later, on January 30th, 1988, Rollin 60 Crip member by the name of Darrell Collins, a known shooter in Jack Boy, was out in Westwood Village on Bronxton Avenue when he spotted a Mansville gangster Crip by the name of Tyrone Swain. Now, this was a Friday night, and the streets were filled with young people out enjoying their time. Collins and Swain would exchange words, and Collins would pull his strap out and open fire. But in the midst of shooting, he would completely miss Swain, and bullets would fly and hit Karen Toshima directly in her head, killing her. Karen and her boyfriend were out celebrating her new job promotion. By the time the police arrived, both Swain and Collins had fled the scene. But only a few weeks later, on February 6th, Collins would be arrested for the shooting, and he would be charged with the murder and attempted murder of both Karen Toshima and Tyrone Swain. And by the end of his trial, he was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. Over the years, the Rollin 60s continued to grow in size and leave a trail of bodies behind them, and nobody was safe. In the summer of 1991, 20 members of the Rollin 60 Crips pulled up to Rancho Park, where kids and families were out celebrating, playing baseball, and enjoying the summer weather. The 60s would hop out the car, armed with Uzis and MAC-10s. They spotted a group of men from a rival gang, and there was a confrontation. Moments later, the 60s would open fire, letting off 30 rounds. Kids were heard screaming, families began running for cover, but somehow, by the grace of God, nobody was hit in this instant. The Rollin 60 members got back into their vehicles and fled the scene. When the police arrived, they found shell casings everywhere. But not long after this shooting, a man walking his Rottweiler was held at gunpoint and robbed of his dog. And moments after this, a restaurant was also robbed. And authorities would tie this incident with the Rollin 60s, directly following the Rancho Park shooting. Nobody was arrested in any of these incidents because people were afraid to come forward and speak up. Now, the following year, in 1992, a well-known 60 member by the name of Eugene Henley, aka Big U, and Eddie Wagner attempted to rob a man whom he thought was a drug dealer at gunpoint for 33 pounds of cocaine. Big U was unaware that this drug dealer was an undercover cop, and this was a sting operation set up by the sheriff's department. Seconds after Big U pulled out his gun, the sheriff's department rushed in, and both Big U and Wagner were arrested by the officers. And after their trial, Big U and Wagner were both sentenced and convicted to 23 years in prison. So no one and nobody was off limits when it came to the streets and the Rollin 60s getting their way. And on March 23rd of 1996, the day after her 18th birthday, Lee Amber Smith headed to the gas station with her boyfriend on the corner of Florence and Crenshaw. As she stood pumping her gas, members of the Rollin 60s would spot her and roll up next to her and roll down their window, and without warning, they would open fire. She was hit multiple times with one fatal shot going directly to her head, fatally wounding her. EMTs would immediately make their way to the gas station and transport Smith to the Martin Luther King Hospital, where she would be pronounced dead. Officers believed that she was targeted simply because she was wearing red. Neither Lee Smith nor her boyfriend were affiliated or associated with any gangs in any way. After her shooting, her death was discussed at the 1996 Rise Summit, which included OG Rollin 60 members who called her death an atrocity. And a lot of respected OGs there spoke out against this murder and tried to come up with some sort of solution. Now, just a few months later, on July 21st, 1996, Rollin 60 Crips, Donnell Scott, Dupree Green, were having breakfast at Norma's in Inglewood after leaving the strip club. While sitting down, rival gang members Aiden Rios, Ray Banks, and Marcus Kimball and Drew Young walked in. Just hours before at the strip club, the 60s had words with the same group. Immediately, Aiden Rios and Marcus Kimball pressed the 60 members. Kimball sat down next to Green and put his arm around his shoulder. And out of nowhere, Rios punched Green several times. Rios then grabbed Donnell Scott's sandwich and started eating it. And out of nowhere, Scott pulled a sawed-off shotgun from under the table and shot Rios directly in his face at point-blank range. Everybody inside the restaurant began to run, but 60s member Donnell Scott wasn't finished. He let off 6 more shots, chasing Banks and Kimball and Young out of the restaurant. And he screamed out, "I'ma kill you motherfuckers too." By the time the EMTs arrived, Aiden Rios would be pronounced dead, and Donnell Scott would be identified by multiple witnesses and would later be arrested by the LAPD for this shooting. By the end of his trial, Donnell Scott will be found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and attempted murder, and he will be sentenced to 44 years in prison. And on April 25th, 2001, Rollin 60 Crip member Kenneth Gilliam, aka Lil Husterfoot, saw a group of teens who lived in the 8 Trey hood, known as MJ, SK, and GA, walking along 81st and Dinker. Now, not long before, Rollin 60s member Kenneth had a fight with one of the young kids from the group named SK, who he recognized walking down the street. Immediately, Kenneth would pull up in a white Cadillac and yell out, "Now what, motherfucker?" Then Kenneth opened fire on the group, letting off 11 shots. MJ and his friends all ran, but MJ would fall. And once MJ got up, a bullet ricocheted off the pavement and hit him directly in the jaw, tearing through his gum and knocking out his teeth, causing him to collapse on the pavement. As Kenneth drove by, he yelled out, "Lil Husterfoot, 6-0. Eventually, Rollin 60 member Kenneth Gilliam will be arrested and charged with attempted murder. And by the end of his trial, he was found guilty of attempted murder and convicted to 3 concurrent life sentences in a state prison, with 2 enhancement of 25 years to life. A few years later, on June 3rd, 2003, Rollin 60 Crip member by the name of Jarrell Patrick, aka Tiny Mon, and Jason Smith, aka Baby Brains, saw 3 men standing outside of a pager store in the 60s hood. The men included Lamar Grant, Lawrence Middleton, and Kieron Bradley, who had just bought some weed. Now, as Patrick and Smith rolled up, Smith didn't recognize the group and started staring. So Lawrence Middleton, who was standing outside the store, said, "What you looking at?" And this would piss Smith off. So Smith and Patrick would hop out the car and start pressing him. Immediately, Smith and Middleton start squabbling. Lamar Grant would then swing at Jarrell Patrick, aka Tiny Mon, but he would miss. Patrick would pull out a strap and everybody would start running, except for Middleton, who was still fighting with Smith. Patrick would then approach Smith and Middleton, who were fighting, and open fire. Patrick would hit Middleton 3 to 5 times in his back. Immediately, Patrick and Smith hopped back in the car and left the scene. Witnesses nearby would call 911, but Middleton would die from his wounds. About a month later, Jarrell Patrick of the Rollin 60s Crips will be arrested for this murder. And during the trial, Patrick claimed self-defense, but that defense would fall short, and he will be convicted of murder and sentenced to 43 years to life in prison for the murder of Lawrence Middleton. Now, 2 years later, on May 19, 2005, well-known producer Quincy Jones III was producing a documentary called Bloods and Crips, Made in America. Earlier that day, the Rollin 60 Crip member by the name of Kenneth Brown, aka Khaki Blue, and Akila Williams, aka Baby Chico, had been interviewed by Quincy Jones for the film. At around 3:40 p.m., about a mile away from the interview, A-Tray gangster Crips, Joe Nash and Derek Boston, slid through the 60s neighborhood. 2 Rollin 60s members were on the porch, Michael D. Pillars, aka Baby Khaki Blue, and another man by the name of Yusuf Brooks. The A-Tray gangsters would roll up and start shooting. Yusuf Brooks was hit multiple times with gunfire, but he would survive. And Michael D. Pillars was unharmed. Now, nearly 2 hours after this shooting, at around 5:30 p.m., Quincy Jones would finish the interviews, and the Rollin 60 Crips, Kenneth Brown and Williams, will be looking for some get back. About 30 minutes later, Kenneth Brown and Williams would drive near 74th and Dinker when they spotted Derek Boston and Willie Richard, aka G-Ride of the A-Trays. Brown, who was the passenger in the car, would yell out, "What's up?" throw up the 60s gang sign as they passed the A-Tray members. Immediately, the 60s would do a U-turn in the street and come back, and Brown would lean out the window and open fire on the A-Tray members. Boston was hit, and Willie Richard was struck in his chest, but they would survive. Now, not long after this shooting, police officers who got the call through dispatch would be patrolling the area and would find the abandoned Acura that the Rollin 60s were driving during the shooting. So immediately, police officers would set up a perimeter, and shortly afterwards, they would arrest both Brown and Williams for the shooting. After being charged for attempted murder, both Brown and Williams will be convicted of gang enhancements and premeditated murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Now, just 2 years later, on July 30, 2007, Rollin 60 Crip member by the name of Lawrence Jones and his 6-month pregnant girlfriend by the name of Rokisha Quinn got into an argument. While in the vehicle, Quinn would end up breaking Lawrence's car stereo, and one thing led to another. A fight would break out, and Lawrence would drag her by her hair and force her back into his car so they can go get his stereo fixed. And as he got out the car, he would lock Quinn inside the vehicle so she couldn't escape. But she would manage to get outside the car and call her best friend on the phone, Sharday Johnson. She would ask Johnson to come pick her up. But by the time Sharday Johnson arrived to the store, both Lawrence and Quinn had left. 60s member Jones would then drive Quinn to the nearby Sprint store in Culver City. Once again, he would lock her inside the vehicle as he went inside to get his phone fixed. But Quinn, once again, would get out the car, get on the phone, and call her friends to come get her. But this time, Sharday Johnson, Chantel Martinez, and 2 other women would show up. And as Lawrence came outside from the Sprint store, Johnson and Lawrence would exchange words, and it would ultimately lead to a fight. As they began fighting, Lawrence would slam Johnson on the ground, smashing her head into the pavement. Nearby witnesses would come and break the fight up, and Quinn would leave with her girlfriends, and Lawrence would return back to his vehicle. Now, later on that day, Jones would argue over the phone with one of Quinn's friends by the name of Muhammad, who would tell Jones that he could run a fade with her cousin, Crips from the Westside Boulevard Crips. Crips would let it be known that he wasn't getting involved in this situation. And not long after this phone conversation, Lawrence Jones and 2 other members of Rollin 60s would roll up to the Westview neighborhood where Muhammad Quinn and Chantel Martinez and Sharday Johnson were all at. The Rollin 60 members would pull up in the middle of the street and Lawrence would hop out. He would say, on 6-0, I'll fight anybody. And one of Quinn's friend, Muhammad, she would walk up and she had a metal bat and she would swing it at Jones' head and Jones and her would begin fighting. And as Jones and Muhammad is fighting, 2 other females would hop in and now Lawrence is being jumped by multiple females at one time. And in the middle of the scuffle, the 2 Rollin 60 Crips that came with Lawrence would hop up out the car. Eventually, the fight was broken up. As Jones stood up, he would look around and say, y'all really gonna let these bitches jump me? Is this how the West Side Boulevards get down? The Rollin 60 members pulled the strap and start blasting. Multiple people were hit, both men and women, with Chantel Martinez, also known as White Girl, was struck in the head as she collapsed on the ground. Immediately, the 60 members would flee the scene. And by the time the EMTs would arrive on the scene, they would rush Martinez to a nearby hospital, who would die just 3 hours later. Now, with multiple witnesses at the scene, including all Quinn's friends, Lawrence Jones would be ID'd and eventually be arrested and charged for this murder. And by the end of his trial, he will be convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 125 years to life in prison. Now, about a decade after all of this went down, on July 2017, Rollin 60 Crip by the name of Janelle Williams pulled up to Gage Avenue at around 5 a.m. in the morning. She approached a man by the name of Marcus Wilkerson, who was her ex-boyfriend, who she was angry with for cheating on her. She and Marcus would exchange words and start arguing. But out of nowhere, Williams will pull a gun out, and Marcus Wilkerson will respond and say, I can't believe you're really doing this to me. Rollin 60 member Janelle Williams will shoot Wilkerson in his groin area as he would fall behind a nearby vehicle. She would then flee the scene, but Marcus Wilkerson would bleed out as the bullet had struck an artery in his groin area. And by the time the paramedics had arrived to try to save his life, he died. But the crazy part about the situation is, although Janelle Williams was mad at Marcus Wilkerson for cheating on her, she was dating a rival gang member by the name of David Bean from the A-Tray Gangster Crips. And these two would go on a Bonnie and Clyde type of murder spree. Now, a month after the shooting, on August 9th, Williams and Beans and a woman by the name of Tiffany Doxey would head to a hotel to buy dope from a man by the name of Sean Pryor and his wife Sandra. Beans would wait in the hallway as Doxey and Williams would knock on the door. As Pryor opened the door, he would let them in. But as he started to make the transaction, he realized that Williams had handed him counterfeit money, and a confrontation would ensue. A-Tray member Beans would step in the room and immediately pull out his gun and say, you know what this is, give it all up. Pryor would then throw the money on the floor as he and his wife, Sandra, would try to forcibly push both Beans, Williams, and Tiffany out of the door. Eventually, they were able to get the door closed, separating them from Beans and Williams. But Beans would then go around and break a nearby window and begin shooting through the window. Sandra would get on the phone to try to call 911, but when she ran back into the room, she would see her husband, Sean, laying on the ground critically injured. Williams and Beans and Tiffany would then flee the scene. Sadly, Sean Pryor would die from his injuries. Now, after the shooting, Williams, Beans, and Doxey would pull into a nearby parking lot. And out of nowhere, Williams would pull out a gun and shoot Doxey straight in her face, killing her right there in the car. Williams would then exit that vehicle and get into the vehicle with Beans, and they would drive off and leave the scene.
Tonight, 1 man and 1 woman are dead. Are the murders related?
And see, family and friends of the victim gathered here. They've been here all day. They tell us he was shot while in his motel room. They also tell us his wife was there. A woman shot and killed, her body found inside a car early this morning. Police say they got a call about a suspicious vehicle on the 7900 block of Van Ness Avenue and discovered the victim, who suffered at least 1 gunshot wound. She was pronounced dead at the scene, one of 2 deadly shootings in Inglewood today. The first one was at King's Motel on Imperial Highway around 2:45 a.m. That's where police say they found 52-year-old Sean Pryor suffering multiple gunshot wounds.
About 2 days after that shooting, Williams and Beans heading into the Rollin 60s neighborhood so Williams could sell her cell phone. Now, at around 10 a.m., Williams got out of the car while Beans stayed in the car. Beans had his seat reclined all the way back so that nobody in the 6-0 neighborhood would recognize him because he was a member of A-Tray. As Williams began to talk to a man by the name of Jose, a Rollin 60 Crip member by the name of Kenyatta Thornton, aka Tape Off, would walk up. He would say what's up to Williams, but then he would ask her who was the dude sitting in the car, and she would respond, he's nobody. But Thornton wasn't letting it go. She would then walk up to Thornton and say, just leave us alone. But again, Thornton wasn't letting this go. Thornton then would approach the car and ask Beans, what you doing over here? The two would then exchange words, and suddenly, Beans would pull out the strap and shoots Thornton straight in his chest, critically wounded him. Williams would then hop back into the car with Beans, and they would flee the scene. Jose would call 911, and the paramedics would then rush and take Thornton to the nearby hospital, but Thornton would die from his wounds. Now, just days later, on August 16th, both Williams and Beans would be arrested for the multiple murders. And during the trial, it was revealed that the same gun had been used for all 4 murders. And in the end, Beans and Williams both would be found guilty. David Bean was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms in prison, and Janelle Williams was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison for these murders. As we head into the 2020s, and on March of 2025, the Rollin 60s Crips will be hit with a RICO charge.
Neighborhood Crips gang in South LA. Detectives have arrested multiple people, and this morning, they're still looking for others.
South LA crime boss Eugene Big U Henley is now in custody. Authorities say he ran a mafia-like organization while masquerading as a music mogul and gang peacemaker.
They do say that part of the investigation involves the murder of another young rapper back in Las Vegas. Back in 2021, I talked to police in Vegas, and they told me over the phone that the murder was over, are you ready for this? That he had written something in a song supposedly talking bad about Big U, and that is why he ended up getting murdered. That's what the police were telling me.
I want to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.